Welcome, everyone. And we'll take a couple of minutes to have our colleagues and friends join us. It always feels so good when we gather like this. Welcome, Claudia. Good idea. Welcome. Introduce yourselves to each other in the chat.
Hi, Yemi. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Of course, we'll ask everyone to stay muted. Introduce yourselves to each other in the chat while we wait for our colleagues to join us. Welcome, Sarah. Okay, let's begin. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see so many of you interested and wanting to gather to be part of this important conversation on migration, race, child welfare, and citizenship. It is such a critical conversation for us to be having, as we know. Um, I will, before I go on and on, I just wanted to welcome you and then I will pass it so we do a bit of housekeeping and then we will begin. Adele?
Good afternoon, everyone. Just gonna mention a few housekeeping and logistics. So please let me know if you can see my screen. Housekeeping, engagement, and self-care points for today's session. First, if you'd like to use the French simultaneous interpretation feature, please go to your control toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom screen, click on the interpretation icon, and choose French. If you wish to use the closed caption feature, as well, go to the control toolbar of your Zoom screen and click on Show Caption icon presented with CC. Zoom fatigue is real, so do what you need to do to take care of you first. Stay present and be attentive to your body and your emotions. Please keep yourself muted throughout the session. And if you have any technical questions regarding how to enable any of those features, please feel free to text us at chatbox support. You'll see us in the participants in the beginning of the list. And finally, when the session will end, you will automatically have the survey open on your browser. Please take a minute or two to fill in this very short survey, which will help us when it comes to organizing future events. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adil. And we've been joined by more of our colleagues from across our province and country. Welcome, everyone. My name is Debbie Douglas, and I'm the Executive Director of OCASI. So glad to be able to host this wonderful conversation that we're about to have this afternoon. But first, as always, we need to acknowledge the lands. Given that this is Black History Month, I also want to take the opportunity to welcome in my ancestors as we speak to this topic that hits so heavily on our African descent communities here in Ontario, but across Canada. Toronto, the Mohawk name of this place that we call Toronto, is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Bell Covenant, which is an agreement among the Haudenosaunee and Ojibwe confederacies to share and care for the lands and waters of this territory. As we know, this place has been the traditional and current home of many other First Nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit, and more recently of Inuit and Métis peoples living in our urban space. As we prepare to engage in this discussion of the many manifestations of anti-Black racism in many of our public institutions and systems, from immigration to child welfare, we know that Indigenous, First Nations children in particular here in Ontario, have a long history of having their children stolen from their families, and along with the children of African descent, are currently highly overrepresented in our child welfare system here in the city of Toronto. At OCASI, we are committed to providing opportunities for our sector to learn about First Peoples and their ongoing struggles against settler colonialism. This is, as I said, timely conversation for us to be having. Some of you may know that there are many organizations, some represented here today, who have been putting the issue of migrant children, children who come to Canada at a young age, who find themselves in the child welfare system, who often have a pipeline with very little support, find themselves in trouble with the criminal punishment system, who do their time as everyone else and comes out and faces a double punishment of deportation. It is wrong. And we need to change this in our public policy. There is a bill making its way through the Senate that is being championed by Senator Mobina Jaffer that we are all supporting. We also know that there are other young people who have come to Canada seeking refuge. And for some reason, Canada immigration finds themselves wanting to remove the status and the support that we should continue to offer them. They are looking to send them back to a place where they are not safe. This too is wrong. And so we're very glad to have a panel who will be diving into these issues. We'll be coming to you, asking you at the end of this session to engage in some advocacy and to offer some material support for one of our panelists. But before we get there, it is my great pleasure to introduce our moderator for this afternoon, Temisan Boyo Fanou. She's a lawyer and consultant specializing in labor, migration, and human rights. Prior to launching her consulting practice, Temisan served as a member of the Refugee Protection Division of the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada. She is currently an adjunct instructor at Queen's University, Faculty of Law, where she teaches a course on refugee protection and trauma-informed client services. Temisan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Debbie, and welcome everyone. My name is Temisan, and it is a pleasure and privilege to moderate this important program on migration, race, child welfare, and the right to citizenship. I'm really looking forward to this discussion and to hearing from our excellent panelists who have a lot to teach us on this issue. From my perspective, my professional experience intersects with these issues in many different ways. As Debbie mentioned, I'm a former member of the Refugee Protection Division of the IRB. And during my time at the board, I heard many refugee claims from children, including unaccompanied children, some of whom came with fraudulent documents because that was their only option to escape human rights abuses in their country of origin. And now in my consulting practice, part of my work is helping governments and policymakers to ensure that children can fully realize their basic fundamental rights under international law, which starts with the Convention on the Rights of the Child, but also the ILO Fundamental Conventions and others. And in this context, we see all the time that immigrant and migrant children are often excluded, either explicitly because of their lack of status, or implicitly when no thought is given to the unique obstacles and vulnerabilities that they face when designing policy and programs. And then when you layer on additional intersections such as race, and particularly the experience of migrants who are Black and of African descent, and those, of course, who are or have been in the child and youth welfare systems, this often leads to even further exclusion and denial of rights. So this is a very important topic, and we are lucky today to have three panelists who are very well versed in the intersection of these issues and can speak to it from both their professional and lived experiences. So to kick us off, I'm going to ask each panelist to give us a brief opening statement just to situate themselves and their perspective on, or perspectives on today's topic. So I'll start with Danette. Danette is the acting general counsel of the Black Legal Action Center. She attended Osgoode Hall Law School at York University and has been practicing law since 2002. She has extensive litigation experience and has argued cases before all levels of court in Ontario, as well as before various administrative tribunals. Thank you very much for being here today, Danette. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Temisan, and thank you everyone for tuning in today. What I think is most important to know about me is that I don't just approach this work from the perspective as a legal professional. I myself am an immigrant. My family came to Canada when I was an older child. It took many, many years for us to obtain status in Canada. So I have direct lived experience with the Canadian immigration system and how it does not serve people in the best of ways. For all of those years where we lacked status, each year when we had to renew our authorizations, either to study or to work, was fraught with anxiety and stress. And I remember that feeling entirely, and saving up for each of us to be able to pay the fees that were associated with the applications every year. I'm the first in my family to complete a post-secondary education. Prior to joining BLAC, I practiced family law. So the child welfare system is one of my areas of expertise as well. In my personal life, I'm a parent to a wonderful adult daughter and a very tiny toy Australian Shepherd dog. From a political perspective, I am a believer in Dr. Walter Rodney's philosophies. And I think that it is time, and particularly now we see this, to dismantle all of these colonialist imperial thought structures. All of these social constructs that don't serve us and keep us from participating in a fulsome way in Canadian society need to be dismantled. Last night, my daughter and I watched Spike Lee's Malcolm X. we do it every year as our Black History Month tradition, mostly as a way of reinforcing what Malcolm X taught us, that we should be proud, that there are things that we can accomplish when we stand together. And watching that movie reminds me, in this forum particularly, when people unite for a specific cause, we can achieve success. I will leave it at that. I'll talk a little bit about the Black Legal Action Center. Just one slight correction, I'm no longer the acting general counsel. The clinic has hired a executive director and general counsel, Michelle Farrell. The Black Legal Action Center was incorporated in 2017. We began offering direct services to clients in 2019. The Black Legal Action Center is one of 13 specialty legal aid clinics across Ontario, specifically mandated to address instances and issues of individual and systemic anti-Black racism. As said, we provide direct legal services to individuals, summary legal advice, brief services, and individual representation where authorized. My job is mostly to oversee the systemic work, the test case litigation, the law reform and community development activities, and our public legal education programs. We are governed by our community board of directors, and we have 8 staff currently for the entire province of Ontario. As you can imagine, that's quite a task. We operate primarily under the human rights umbrella in the area of housing, social assistance, employment, education, police complaints, and prison law. We provide mostly summary advice in education matters and assist with appeals under the Education Act. In employment, similarly, we provide summary advice and assist with some employment standards claims. We appear generally in matters before the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario and represent applicants only. So for instance, if you're a Black landlord, we will not be able to assist you. We have an intake process. I will be attaching a copy of my presentation, which has our website information. We can do intakes by phone or email. People do have to qualify financially, as we are funded by Legal Aid Ontario, so they have to meet a financial eligibility test. There are certain exceptions to that, but certainly during the intake process, we would advise anyone of that. Black is the lead of a coalition called Our System, Our Children, Our Responsibility, OCASI for short. This is a campaign of deportation of child welfare survivors, to which several community organizations belong. OCASI seeks to end the deportations of child welfare survivors and to address related immigration issues. The coalition was established with the following goals: to provide a pathway to citizenship for all people who came to Canada as children and spent any period of their childhood in a child welfare agency, foster family, or kinship care. The coalition is also seeking to suspend the enforcement of any removal orders against persons who came to Canada as children and spent any period of their childhood in child welfare services. The coalition, thirdly, is expecting and has actually initiated and has been successful in doing so, an expedited pathway to permanent resident status through a public policy under Section 25.2 of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. The reason OCASI was established was because in 2020, the Immigration Division of the Immigration and Refugee Board issued removal orders against 686 people on the basis of criminality. That's a shocking number of removals. A number of the people who were facing removals at that time had come to Canada as children and were involved in Canada's child welfare system as children and youth. Children don't really have a choice where their parents bring them to. Children have no say in the matter. And I, as an older child, faced that as well when my parent relocated to Canada. Because the state failed to meet these obligations, the state had a legal, our position is that the state had a legal obligation to provide these children with care, guidance, and other services generally expected of parents, including a responsibility to seek Canadian citizenship on their behalf. The two important concepts that we rely on this in this matter are in loco parentis, which means in place of a parent. It's a Latin phrase. The state would stand in place of the parent and so would be responsible for all significant decisions for the child's well-being. The second concept that the coalition has put forth is the best interest of the child. How can it be in the best interest of a child who has lived in Canada for all of their life, if not most of their life, to be deported to a country they have no connection with? We've all heard these stories of children who may have come to Canada at age 2, were caught up in the child welfare system, then the criminal justice system, and then deported back to whichever country they came from. As Debbie pointed out, this is double punishment. So first, these children are subjected to penal punishment consequences and then banishment from Canada. There are no others who are being subjected to this kind of dual punishment. Josh is probably going to speak a little bit more about this, but anti-Black racism in the child welfare system is of deep, deep concern to us. We know that Black children and families are overrepresented in child welfare systems relative to their proportion in the general population. We know that Black children are disproportionately admitted into the system and were not citizens at the time when they became involved. So they are much more likely to be impacted by a failure of the state to seek and obtain Canadian citizenship on their behalf. It's worth noting that youth in the child welfare system are particularly vulnerable to crossing over to the criminal justice system. When a child, for instance, is in a group home, it's not uncommon for that group home, if the child has missed curfew or there is interpersonal conflict in the home, for them to call the police on that child, which may have quite serious consequences and begin a series of interaction of the child becoming known to police force. Black youth are more likely to receive severe charges, to receive more administrative charges, and to spend more time in pretrial detention. This is what we call the child welfare to youth justice pipeline. The Ontario Human Rights Commission has published a report titled Interrupted Childhoods, Overrepresentation of Indigenous and Black Children in Ontario Child Welfare. If you haven't read that, please do so. It's very enlightening. It's also well documented that police services single out Black people for greater scrutiny, surveillance, and questioning. As a result, police are more likely to charge, overcharge, and arrest Black people. The Black Legal Action Centre is currently part of a class action suit against the Toronto Police Service on the carding issue, which is the collection and retention of personal identification information of individuals. Once arrested, judges and justices of the peace are more likely to deny Black people bail. Concurrent to this immigration issue is a huge concern of the Canadian bail system. Right now, the Trudeau government is pushing a tough on crime message, which includes stiffer penalties, denial of bail, which is deeply concerning to the Black community. Black people are more likely to plead guilty just to avoid these circumstances. They are more likely to be unjustly convicted and have more severe sentences imposed on them. So as a result, Canada incarcerates Black people at rates that are disproportionate to their representation in the general population. Despite sorry.
Thanks, Danette. No, this is very, very useful and interesting. And we're going to expand more on this, I think, when we go into our first question. But I just want to make sure that the other participants have a chance to just do a brief introduction as well, and then we can really get into the meat of the issues.
My apologies.
No, nothing to apologize for. Thank you very much, Danette. So I'll quickly introduce our next panelist, Josh. Josh is the executive lead of the Collective of Child Welfare Survivors. Josh is a Black, queer, gender non-conforming, disabled, MAG community organizer and child welfare survivor abolitionist, attending Osgoode Hall Law School at York University at the PhD level. Josh has a bachelor and master of social work from Toronto Metropolitan University and a law degree from the University of Windsor. Josh, thank you, and please go ahead.
Hi, folks. So as you heard, my name is Josh. My pronouns are he, they. And so as a child welfare survivor, I was pretty much interacting with the system pretty shortly after birth, and was then put into the foster care system, or foster housing, where myself and my brother were placed and experienced a significant amount of violence. And then I was adopted into a white household, which, came with its own violences. And so that has led, in terms of the work that I do, I have a background in community organizing, particularly the interests of Black folks. I consider, in terms of my politics, I consider myself, within abolition and anarchism. And if those are terms that are scary to you, I suggest you look them up, because we are no longer in the times to play nice with the state. And so as you hear me talk, you're going to hear me use the phrase family policing system rather than child welfare system, because child welfare, youth and care, those are all lies. And in fact, it's a particular kind of way, I would say, to make adults comfortable with what's happening in the system, even those who say that they're against it. Family policing as an understanding and as a term, is from Dorothy Roberts, a Black feminist scholar, has been working around this for decades. I would also argue that child welfare survivors ourselves had that understanding. We're often being used in research to then have researchers use our experiences, and maybe they put a name to it, but we're the ones that provided the description. And so family policing as a term just acknowledges that that's what this is, right? That these systems, it's not just the criminal punishment system. There tends to be a hyper focus on that system. There's the psychiatric system. There's OW, Ontario Works. There's the ODSP system. There's the school system. And then there's this supposed child welfare system. All of these work together. Housing, all of these work together. And that has been a large part of my work. From a young age, I kind of became public enemy number one for child welfare services, starting off with Children's Day Toronto. And so, through my like community organizing and also academic work, I've done a lot of work around having people rethink and reorient ourselves in this system, right? So when we talk about anti-Blackness being in the system, okay, great. It's actually the plantation, right? Black kids are being whipped. Black kids are being made to do work while white kids don't in the household, right? Black kids report being called the N-word. And I've said in the past, if I took my narrative and my brother's narrative, and I just talked about it without saying me or I, there's particular experiences that myself and other Black child welfare survivors, it would sound like the plantation, and that's because it is, right? There's an economy made off of this, right? So folks might not know this, but diagnosing, child welfare survivors and privatizing and putting us in privatized spaces, the more diagnoses we have, the more medication we're pushed, and so therefore the more money that group home gets, right? Because that's where Black kids more often end up. And so there's a price tag to us, and Black kids have always known that, up to $80,000, $90. And imagine if the state just gave the families those funds. And so, a large part of my academic work, I think it's great to read the Ontario Human Rights Commission. I think it's also great to read the writing for Black child welfare survivors ourselves, because we do have a particular kind of upset with this repeated conversation of overrepresentation and disproportionality. Like, folks might not know this, but that's actually a century-old problem. So we need to kind of get over it and have other conversations. And so my to plug myself, so my research has been called the resistance strategies of Black child welfare survivors. We've also done, in conjunction with some other students helping me, the impact of COVID-19. So these are on our website. I'll get to introducing who I am officially in a second. I've also done work around having us rethink the term resilience. You might not know, but that became a program in itself to blame largely Black child welfare survivors. And so in this conversation of deportation, though, so I think it's important that we acknowledge that OSACOR, you know, is doing this, and there's been these conversations. But actually, back in 2018, it was Black, queer, women, trans folks who were really fighting this deportation, and had it started with Abdi. You know, I don't have the time to get into his narrative, but in terms of Abdul and Fatuma, they were two Black child welfare survivors, both of which I believe were facing deportation. And so as we go through and hopefully get what we want from the state, I think it's always important to remember who took the licks from the state. You know, when we were fighting, and we had, you know, even Black judges telling us to stop fighting, and we said, no, we're still going to fight. So it's important to remember that. So myself, the other official role that I'm here in is the Collective of Child Welfare Survivors. So I'm the executive lead and one of its co-creators. You know, the co-creators being Ashley Ash, and Tyler Dixon, also child welfare survivors, all of us having our distinct experiences. Tyler dealing with group homes, and Ashley dealing with international adoption, then being relinquished and then adopted again. And so the Collective Child Welfare Survivors, we don't partner with CASs. Our main part of what we do is individual advocacy. You know, Black has 8 staff. I'm the only person doing individual advocacy for the entire province. So you can imagine I'm busy. We have volunteers that support and placement students, but, you know, thank God we're going into the hiring process for another staff member. And so with our individual advocacy, we kind of broke from this just solely child-focused model. And so we support primarily Black, Indigenous, and racialized child welfare survivors up to the age of 29 and their families. That's dealing with investigations, that's dealing with service plans, that's helping with reunification. So we try to take this holistic model in providing individual advocacy. It's non-legal. Arguably, actually, that makes things move faster because we don't have to wait for court dates. Folks dealing with the system have a right to a resource person, and so we swoop in, and, you know, we sometimes make some white women social workers cry. But that's the work we do. We're also do community development. So we do workshops with young people. We do workshops in organizations, as long as they're not CAS, because how can we train you, then cut you at the next day? And so, you know, when it comes to, we're also currently under Black as their organizational mentor. And so OSACOR, I named OSACOR, let's be clear. And so our role, because CCWS, we tend to not focus on dealing with the state, because we were kids who did all these community consultations from when we were 16, 17, 18 for years, and we've been asked our experiences, and we're still here, right? So we have a rule where we don't actually engage research projects as research participants, and we don't do lobbying with the state, because, you know, if it's our view that there are other spaces such as Black that can take on that work and have better resources to do so. But for the coalition, what our work has been making sure that folks in that coalition think about child welfare survivors beyond client and beyond someone to save, right? And especially how tokenism can play a role in that, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll stop there because I know there's a bunch of questions that need to be asked, but that is me.
Thank you very much, Josh. And so now we'll go to our third panelist, Abdullah. Abdullah is a Somali community member and activist, and he is one of many Somali youth refugees currently facing deportation by the Canadian Border Services Agency. So we are very grateful that he is here to share his story. Abdullahi, if you would like to introduce yourself and share your perspective on today's topic, thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Abdullahi Muse. I am one of the Somali youth, and I'm an activist for the Somali youth. I've been doing this job of activist for the last 4 years on a case that involves on a 400 plus Somali youth in the age of 18 to 28 who are facing deportation from CBSA, and 99% of those youth, before they got these deportation letters, they had status, they had everything, and they were living a life that everybody wished for. And so we went from up to down to zero to deportation letters. So it was tough time for the last 4 years, and for the last 3 weeks, it has been the worst 3 weeks that we really had in this country. So I am really happy to share my story and the story of those youth and how life is taking them through CBSA and, you know, the problem that they are undergoing through. So yeah, I really look forward to share the story of those youth and see how everybody who is on this panel to help them and, you know, raise their voice to the government and anybody else that can help them. So let me just leave it over there and we move on.
Thank you very much, Abdullah. And thank you to all the panelists for their introductions. For the first question, if it's okay, I'd actually like to go back to you, Abdullah. We want to start off by talking about how Black and African immigrant and migrant children, such as, and particularly those who have been taken into state care, those who've arrived in Canada as asylum seekers, are disproportionately impacted by a lack of access to citizenship and other immigration and settlement related challenges. And so you were just speaking about the experiences of those in your community, those that you've advocated for, and your own experience as well. If you can tell us a bit more about the barriers that are faced by Black and African migrants and immigrant children, and the sort of hurdles that they're forced to overcome within the current context of the immigration system.
Well, the much that I understand from the immigration system, you know, I came to this country 8 years ago, and when I came to this country, like it was a promising journey for me to come to this country. So when I came here, I thought everything is under the law, everyone's life mattered, and everyone is treated equally. That's the belief that I had. When I came, I saw the opposite side of everything. For example, the community that I'm from is a Somali community. So when I came here, I saw a lot of kids that were born in this country. And before I came, I thought the kids that live in this country are living the best life that I could wish to live. When I came and I see what I saw, it was a shocking moment. For instance, like my auntie, she had 6 kids. In the 6 kids she had, today she's left with only 1 kid. So 3 of the kids were just caught up into gang violence in this country. At back home, everybody understands that Canada is a safe country, the best place to raise kids, and you know, like everybody wish to be here. So what happened to this is 3 of her kids were killed through a gang violence, and 2 of her kids are in jail today because of a violence that they just did at their teenage age. So when I see that, and I see a lot of same and similar stories that is happening to the Somali community and to other African communities, because we all share the same story. When we talk to people, when you see people and you start talking to people about what's happening to them, it's like, it's shocking. The picture that's outside Canada and the picture that's here is totally different. I don't know how it was generated, but it's totally different. So, for instance, I have been reading into a case of a guy called Abdi, I think so. And the guy, he came here very young age, went to a social welfare. He was taken away. They take away from his parents. And in one way or the other, he ended up into criminal justice system. And then when they released him from the jail, and they didn't apply for him any documents, any citizenship, any nothing. Then when he just came out from the jail, they just issued him a deportation. So, like, when you see that, you had this child, he don't know the country that you want to take him back. You had him when he was a teenager, when he was a kid, and now he's just an adult, and you just removed him from, you know, systemic, you know, jail, and then you want to deport him. Like, it's totally unfair. So these things I came to know when the case that happened to us in the Somali youth, that's 400 Somali youth. Like, I don't know how the government works. I don't know how the techniques and the system they use. Like, how comes 400 youth end up into one case and you just want to deport them? Like, you don't want to hear what led into this issue that you want to deport them. You just want to, like, for them, it's like deporting someone. But to us, I talk to the youth. Most of them were educated. I tell you the stories they were going through. When we came here, most of us, we went to school, we finished high school, we finished college. Like myself, I finished college. And then in 2021, when everything started getting messy, everybody dropped out from school. Everybody, some of them were studying doctors, some were studying nurses. We walked through the pandemic when everybody was locking himself in their homes. We were out there. Most of the girls were doing PSWs, some were doing nursing, some of the guys were doing trucking and deliveries. But when we did everything that we could do to help the communities, when it was our turn, everybody was like, oh, let's deport them. They made this, and the government is like, they should ask one question. How come 400 from one community ended up into one case? Like, they don't ask themselves that question, because the moment they will sincerely ask that question themselves and do an investigation, they will come to know the reality. But when we ask them, like for the last 2 years, we were going through the media, we were going through everywhere advocating for ourselves, trying to get attention from the government and local agencies, but nobody cared. And when CBSA was asked, they say, we're gonna deal this issue case by case. How are you gonna deal an issue that's affecting a whole community, and the case is just one? From the 400 youth, it was just a change of name, but the story behind this case is just one. So you should ask yourself, if you are honest, if you want to help people, you should ask yourself, why? How did this happen? You know, like, I just want to give you
Thank you,
the last.
Abdullahi. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just want to give you one moment. We were shocked. Like last year, end of last year, we saw our case started on 2020, end of 2020. So there was a case of international students that were caught up with the same case as ours. And then in one way or the other, international students raised their voices, everybody came out, and the ministry made a public policy, save them out. Us who are caught the same case, not even a different, not even same case, who happened the case in 4 years ago, we thought that, okay, the same case was solved, ours is gonna be solved too. But it went opposite direction. Our cases, our deportations were expedited. And I can tell you today, 27th of this month, I have an appointment, and 99% of that appointment, they're gonna issue me a deportation order. 99, because through my analysis and the analysis of my lawyer, he said that we have exhausted all the process and all the legal framework that we could help you out. So they put me on an appointment on this month, which is also Black Month, History Month. On 27th of this month, they called me an appointment telling me to bring every single document issued to me by the government of Canada. And the lawyer just tell me that through his experience, is a deportation order date. So you can imagine someone who supports a family of 11 and you want to just remove him. According to them, it's just a removing someone. But according to me, it's a life and death. So, and it's just 1 in 400 cases of us from one community. I hope that one is hard and everybody could raise that voice. So I yield back my time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abdullahi. Thank you for sharing your story and also flagging the story of Abdul Abdi and stories of others in your family and your community. I think it really drives home the real life impact of this. It's not just words on a page. These are lives and that are being completely disrupted and rugs pulled under people. Danette, if it's okay, I'm going to turn it back to you. I know that you had been sharing with us a lot of information about how Black and African immigrant and migrant children are disproportionately impacted. And it would be great to hear more from you on that and any reflections you have as well on Abdullah's experience and the experiences of others that he shared. Thanks, Danette.
Thank you. I unfortunately was not, I learned about the Abdul Abdi case. I only started at Black less than a year ago, but I've read about it and I've met Fatuma actually. She came with us to Ottawa in December to depute before the Canadian Senate on Bill S-235, which Debbie mentioned earlier is Senator Jaffer's bill. I think for me, the most concerning thing is these are children. These were children who came to Canada. They had no agency at the time. They had no say in the matter. They were unable to create their own identification documents. A lot of, and particularly in the Somali community, a lot of the issues arose because of lack of documentation. Somalia was a war-torn country. They had no functioning administrations. Where were people supposed to go to get birth certificates or people who lived in rural areas may not have even had birth registrations. All of these requirements that we impose upon, specifically, I think, immigrants from the continent, the African continent, are unreasonable. And the differential treatment, for example, the hurdles that families from the diaspora have to overcome are again, much more so than, for example, recent examples of people fleeing war from European countries, for example. There's a very clear message being sent that these children in particular are not wanted by Canada. And they're not wanted, and we know they're not wanted because, as I said, they not only face punishment if they get into the criminal justice system, they serve their time, they serve their sentences, but then they're deported. They're kicked out of Canada instead of recognizing, okay, they've served their time. They've, there's no effort made at rehabilitation. There's no consideration of rehabilitation. We've become this law and order punishment society. Canada has completely deteriorated in its world, in the respect of the world, I think, over the past 30, 40 years. Canada had a stellar reputation as being welcoming and open to refugees, as Abdullah said, that was Canada's reputation. That's gone. And they also don't consider the impact on families that may be left behind after these deportation orders are issued. Abdullah talked about, a family of 11. What happens to that family when a parental figure or, a brother, a father, an uncle, whatever is gone? There's no consideration of those impacts. So those are the things I think that are particularly concerning, that there's no compassion for African refugees. And we see that across the globe, not just in Canada, by the way.
Thank you, Danette. I think maybe now let's go back to Josh and center this. We've talked a lot about the experiences of Black and African children in the migration system, in the immigration system, those who are refugees. But we're also looking at this from the context of the child and youth welfare systems, where we know, as Danette also mentioned in her introduction, that Black children are overrepresented and there's disproportionate impact on them. And this has been the central focus of policy and research for many decades. So it'd be great to hear from you, Josh, about what other issues and conditions that you see Black people subject to in the course of your work, including leading up to the point of potential deportations.
Yeah, and I think this connects to a lot of what's been said. You know, people, it's, you know, if we zoom out for a second, we have to remember many of these children are here because of what Canada is doing in other spaces and places, whether it has to do with mining, whether that's sending our own military, whether that's funding other people's military. Look what's happening in Palestine, right? And so many of these children are here and these families are here because of the state of Canada. Whilst Canada is also, as we're hearing, very good at performing a benevolence. Um, and I think like it's important for people to also know that our child welfare system, um, it, there's a borderlessness to how all of this started, right? Like back in the 1920s, a bunch of white women in New York, Montreal, and Ontario got together, and you know, because their capacity to work at that time was often limited to these fundraising spaces or charity spaces. And the woman who played a key role in our policies was a white woman eugenicist, right? And in fact, she didn't even see a reason to care for Black people. But when it became a consistent issue, it was her specific focus was mixed race kids, and that has its own trajectory in the system, right? Um, and so when we jump forward and we hear about workers not applying for citizenship, I need people to understand that, you know, many people who work in the family policing system are just the new slave catchers. That's it, right? People might think, oh, these workers don't lie. Um, just so you know, one of the very few social work spaces run by the government is actually, from my read only, so CAS agency social workers do not have to sign up to be regulated. They do not have to be registered. What does that tell us, right? That tells us, well, now I can't go to a regulatory body to complain about you, right? People need to understand it is very, very difficult to sue CAS because parents don't have a right to sue CAS. Only the CAS only has a duty to the children, as decided by a bunch of white judges who seem to not be able to think, how do we balance both? Shocker. And so then we get to the fact that workers lie all the time. Workers lied on my file. Unfortunately, I have their names. I found their phone numbers, and they're going to have their own accountability. A lot of the work that we do with CCWS, we see all the lies that social workers do to us, which is why, you know, I joked about it earlier, but literally there's been white women that cry on our calls because, I cuss them out. I point out how they lie. And these parents and children often have a lot of their own evidence, and now especially when it comes to technology. And so with all of this evidence, yet and still, when I'm having to advocate for families, um, you know, we have to remember that like these youth are experiencing, and I start with the group home, right? Because we talk about how families are targeted. I start with the group home because, we talk about police being called in. Let me explain to you the condition of a group home. Group homes are jails, right? And guess who work actually often at group homes is cops who moonlight as group home staff. And then I have no clue how we've got 18, 19-year-old people who took a diploma degree working in group homes, right? How you can't even drink alcohol, but you're out here taking care of other people's children. And the conditions, there's bars on windows. Often these kids are not allowed to put anything up on the wall, or the walls are white, the very sanatorium. Things like even like shoes get locked up, right? Personal items get locked up. The group home staff will use discipline to stop folks like myself being able to talk to the youth that we support. So they'll say, oh, the child acted up, so they can't talk to you. And in these spaces, children talk about being locked up in rooms for hours. And this also in some ways happens in the foster home setting. But, there's a criminal that like children are treated, and, this is what my own research found. It's not just about the fact that we call the police. These children are treated as incarcerated people the moment they're in these kinds of spaces. And mind you, I can't even articulate to you the kind of heartbreak that this system produces. And then you have to be a young person trying to process this heartbreak witnessing how people really don't want to engage your heartbreak genuinely. And then you have certain behaviors that either get criminalized or pathologized, and then you get medicated, right? So then what happens? You have young people who age out of the system. They have addictions issues because they're given like heavy medication that now they're adults and have to wean themselves off of. You know, like to survive in this world, like, you know, we're all trying to pay rent. So imagine, you know, the conditions right now. So you've been under resourced. More often than not, young people are not actually being brought to their education spaces, and then they go into the criminal punishment system. So this is why it's called the family policing system, because there's all these conditions working together that when we get to the deportation stage, then all that's red. And sometimes if you read the decisions, some of these treatment centers for young people keep popping up. So why are your kids always popping up in deportation? I thought you're supposed to treat these kids, right? And so I think that's important. And the last thing I just want to correct to show you just how violent these systems are. Abdul Abdi found out he was getting deported because while he was in prison, his bunkmate read the piece of paper and had to explain it to Abdul. And then the bunkmate had L. Jones' phone number and called her. So this man was still in prison trying to navigate all of this, a young man, and then is being told, actually, you have a deportation issue to resolve, right? And again, people have to remember that workers really do not care to do their job, right? We need to let go of seeing workers as good faith people. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Josh. Before we go into the audience, before we go into the audience Q&A and take questions, I'm sure there are a lot of questions after this really interesting discussion. I wanted to go back to you, Danette, and if you can tell us a bit about what can be done at the legal and policy level in order to address these problems, and particularly what you've been working on, or what the coalition has been working on in terms of Bill S-235, and what we need to know about how can we translate into effective policy the way that we want Canada to be, the things that Canada claims to be and to do, the things that are promised to people before they come here, or that people believe before they come here. How can we actually make that a reality through changes in law and policy? Thanks, Danette.
Thank you. Very interesting question. So part of me vacillates between utter despair that we are going to have some sort of significant impact on these systems. There's a lot of pushback constantly when you're trying to bring forth these efforts. For instance, when we appeared before the Senate in December, several of the senators' questions focused on people sending their children to Canada to be put into the child welfare system for purposes of obtaining status. And for me, as a parent, as a family law lawyer, having witnessed, not personally experienced it in that sense as Josh has, but it just seems so incredible to me that they would think that a parent would voluntarily submit their child to such a system, knowing what we know about the system, right? That was kind of shocking. I think we just have to continue to push. We have to unite. I think the benefit of being part of a coalition such as OCASI is that we have a united voice. We approach things collectively, and that, you know, we don't give up. We have to fight, and it is a fight. Abolition is the answer. And indeed, Josh's remarks about it being a family policing system is true. When I worked in family law, I had a colleague of mine who used to do duty counsel work on child protection days. It's such a misnomer, right? Child protection. And he referred to them as baby snatchers. And I thought, oh, that's, you know, that's a bit, but he saw it every day. And I think people who work in these systems, they end up with battle fatigue. So for us, it's like, no, we can't be defeated. We will not allow ourselves to be defeated. We have to continue pushing, naming names, showing people that not everyone who committed a crime is a criminal, right? That just because someone is Black, it doesn't mean that they're lesser than. We have to reinforce these belief systems that people who come from the diaspora are not all here to go on welfare. Like all of these narratives that are taking place, that we are looking for special treatment, I think we need to counter those. And we're starting to do that, united. And I think that's what we need to continue to do. We need to support legislation such as Bill S-235, which, by the way, doesn't go far enough either. But it is a start, right? For us, it's getting our foot in the door, making sure that we can change the law. Policies don't really assist us because the policy that's in place today could be revoked tomorrow. Policies don't really assist us. We live in a system that relies on precedents, a legal system that relies on precedents. So for us, it's convincing people that things have to change and have to change fundamentally. And until that change occurs, we should not give up. We should not despair. That's it. We just have to be tenacious and continue to fight.
Thank you, Danette. So as Debbie mentioned in the chat, if anyone has any questions for our panel, please write it in the Q&A. So that's at the bottom of your screen. You should see an option to write into the Q&A. We welcome all of your questions on a lot of these interesting issues that have been raised. While we're waiting for questions to come in, I'd like to turn it back to Abdullah to share with us a bit on sort of similar to the question I just asked Debbie, I just asked Danette, but from your perspective, what kind of action do you see that's needed, and particularly from the agencies that are serving immigrants and migrants and children, the organizations that many people on this call or in this program work with and work for? What do you see that they could be doing that they're not doing? What kind of additional supports could they be providing that maybe they're not seeing yet, in terms of what people and children in your position and in your community need? If you could share your thoughts on that, Abdullah.
Well, thanks for asking that. I think we need to do some few things to solve this issue. First, I think there should be always constant pushing for a reform on the system, the Canadian system. Either it's immigration or welfare, there should be a constant pushing on policy change. I think the other one is representation in the Canadian system. I think most of the people who are on the immigrants are from immigrants are people who are coming from outside of the country, and the people who are serving them are not the people who are coming, who are immigrants. They're people who are born here, and mostly, people who own the system. So I think first is representation into the Canadian system, whether it is immigration or child welfare system. There should be proportionate representation from all immigrants who are coming to this country, so that, for example, if today I'm a Somali, let's say, for example, I am at the board of directors of CBSA, and then something like this is happening to my community. If I am at the table and this is happening to my community, then I will not be allowing this to happen to my community. So there will be some fairness. And also, the person who will think to do unfairness to the communities will see me that I am there, and he will refrain doing such things. So if you are on the table, I'm 100% sure there's gonna be a big change into the system. Policy change is also a very crucial issue, because all these issues that is happening undergo through a policy that is there, bills that are there, you know. So for example, now if you go like raise an issue, they will not argue with you. They will just pull out a file, say you are under this article, this article, this article, this. So the conversation is over. You have just been told that, oh, this is the law, and the law says like this. But you are not the one who made the law. You are not there. You don't know what the law is, but you are subjected to the law. And the law goes against your interest and the interest of your community. So we need, as people who are advocating on these issues, whether it's immigration or welfare, we should always constantly push on a policy change. Policy change, the big, is going to be a radical issue that's going to change the whole issue. And the third one, I don't know how it's going to happen, but the third one is everything you see in this country goes around with politics. So if, I don't know, I'm not an expert, but if it is necessary or possible, the organizations should try to push the politicians that represent mostly into areas that are, mostly populated with immigrants, to push and work on the interests and ask them to work the interests of the immigrant without breaking the law, working for creating for a system, like the system that are here now, that are in place, is not a system that we know. I don't know the system. When I came here, I didn't know the system. And so we should work into a framework where we tell these elected leaders that what is there in the books is not working for us. You should think of drafting like the ones now, the bills that you said is in the Senate. It's a good start, very good start. But we should think of making more and more and proposing more and pushing these politicians to work on similar issues that at least can improve the life of the immigrants. So I think those three are the main important things that we can do that can serve everybody who is undergoing through this system. So that's my view.
Thank you very much, Abdullahi. So I see we have one question that has come into the Q&A. And this question asks, what should the roles of settlement practitioners or social workers be in dealing with customers of similar cases? Danette or Josh, would you like to address this? Maybe Danette, since your mic is open.
Yeah, very quickly. Absolutely. I think the first thing anyone can do is ask their clients, what is your status? A lot of agencies don't even bother asking that question. And if people have permanent resident status, encourage them to apply for citizenship. Citizenship is the only status that will give you protection from deportation. And sometimes there's sort of a push now legally as well to strip people of citizenship who have behaved badly in Canada. But I think that's what you need to know, that there are options out there. Ask your clients, ensure they have status, help them to acquire the documents necessary to make their immigration claims, refer them to immigration or refugee lawyers. That's the best you can do. Just work on that.
Thanks, Danette. Josh, did you want to speak to this question as well?
Yeah, I mean, I find the language of customer very interesting, because that would assume that someone wanted to have these interactions, not to correct the other person. Again, as a social worker, I can't say as a settlement worker, but I think like I don't know what it's like to be in that position, to be honest. I'm not the person who doesn't think about those things, but I echo what Danette said around like workers don't think about it. And so maybe I'm trying to let other people know the other side of it. If workers don't think about it, and even when they do, they decide if they want to document it or not. Like people don't understand how much power social workers actually have. So if they don't document it, then the next person that reads that file will never even think about it, right? And um, again, I guess because we're not having questions, y'all ask questions. There's too many of you for this to not be a damn question. Um, so I think, I'll give an example though, while we wait for an eager person to provide a question. Right now at CCWS, we've just seen, we're starting to experience this issue, particularly of Haitian boys. And so there's things to think about, or because as I said, the system has a fetish for mixed kids. So you have a dark-skinned Black kid who was whooped by these white missionaries and brought here, and then they relinquished him, right? And in the process of us supporting him, the workers are like, I asked them, I said, does he have status? And then she went, oh, we didn't even think to ask that, right? But they've been supporting him for a year. Now, this worker is being genuine and trying to work around this, but this is to show these kind of cross-border exchanges and that adoption is playing, right? And this is a boy who they're already starting to criminalize him in the way that they're treating him. He's in a group home. And so I think if you're working in this setting, I would say it is easy as asking, but also if you end up passing that file along, making sure that next worker is actually attending to that issue, right? And in fact, willing to push the organizational boundaries to keep that child in your mind, write it down somewhere, keep checking. Because I know workers can do that because y'all like to look in our files all the time, but not be in our file. And so I think that's really the only way to ethically do so should you choose to work in such an organization such as Children's Aid Society.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, I think that's key. You both touched on asking and then documenting. Both of those are very important for the reasons that you explained. Are there any other questions? I'll echo what Josh said, that there's enough people in this program that we should have some more questions on the issues that we've talked about. I know I think and all three of you actually have touched on this already, but this idea of the child welfare to prison pipeline, or the I forget how you put it, Danette, but this link that we see constantly between migration, child welfare, and criminality, and how there are sort of elements in the system that do we have any other questions? Or perhaps as we are sort of getting to the end of the program, maybe if the panelists want to share any sort of final words or closing statements, or anything that you had wanted to share with the audience that you didn't get a chance to within the context of the conversation so far.
Temisan, Water has a question in the chat. She says, is there a pathway or a checklist type documents that workers should have when working with children with precarious legal status?
Absolutely.
There should be, there isn't. Like that's the unfortunate thing. Like with the work that I've done, like reading their standards and all these things, like when it comes to the issue of immigration and even the fact that PLCAS has a separate immigration center, well, why, like, what does that tell us? That already they're separating this idea of immigration from their day-to-day standard practice. And so you would think that even the online system that requests like proof of citizenship, right, of some form, right? But that apparently is not in this archaic old system of CPIN.
Yeah, it's certainly a question that they should be asking. And Josh, thanks for referencing the Center of Excellence that PLCAS conducts, who are responsible for unaccompanied minors, so children who come in and are immediately put into care. It's certainly a question I think we should be asking them, at what lists do they have, and how we can replicate that for some of our settlement agencies in the sector, where families often have first contact as they try to get support for settling here. So things parents should be aware about. So thank you for that.
Thanks. I just wanted to mention a bit about the immigration, refugee, and citizenship policy that's currently in place. Everybody should know about this. It's in effect only until January 2027. It started this January. And it can be revoked at any time. So if you have any clients who satisfy the requirements to apply for PR status, it's just a pathway to citizenship. Please encourage them, go on the website, read what the qualifications are. I'll just briefly hit a couple of the points. So the person must have entered Canada before age 19. So they must have been a legal child. They must be physically located in Canada at time of application, and they must have continuously resided in Canada since age 19, if over the age of 19. And if they were in the care of a child welfare agency, they must have been in the care for at least 1 year cumulatively. We understand that children move in and out of care. So that 1 year sort of was the minister's give on that point for us. Ideally, it shouldn't matter, but it does for the minister. So that's really important. The only exceptions where you will not be able to pursue this pathway is if you committed an offense of serious criminality. So if you're part of organized crime, if you were part of a quote unquote terrorist organization, whatever that means right now, or if you have a health condition that would pose excessive demand on the Canadian healthcare system. So please take a look at the policy. It's in effect until 2027. And please, please support Senator Jaffer's Bill S-235. If you go on the Senate website, you can do a brief, you can talk about your clients, you can let her know what's going on. There are many, many senators who are behind this bill, even conservative senators right now. So we're hoping it gets passed. Thank you. Oh, and I just wanted to say, so the federal government made a number of commitments to combating racism in general, and in particular, anti-Black racism. So enforcing removal orders against 400 Somali immigrants who came here as children obviously undermines these commitments that Canada has made. Blacks also feels that Canada's position has been completely inconsistent with its obligations under the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child. And I talked a little bit about what is the best interest of the child. Is it in the best interest of the child to deport, that child who's only got connections here in Canada back to a country they don't know? So those are the kinds of things that we need to talk about. Please support Bill S-235. We need the legislation. Policies are temporary and can be revoked. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danette. We've got two more questions that came in. One is about whether there's any interagency collaboration or any standardized documentation between agencies. I see that Debbie has provided us a response already in the chat, but if our panelists have any thoughts on what exists and what should exist. And then there's another question about whether settlement workers visit children in group homes, and can they, and could it, or would it help?
As Debbie's kind of saying, so there is and isn't interagency collaboration. So there is an online system called CPIN, which is very defunct and very problematic. But if the question has to do with like just how these agencies talk, they don't, and it leads to so many problems. Each agency can have its own policies, while the Ontario Association of Children's Aid Societies set standards it's pretty much like dependent upon the kinds of resources that are given to the CAS, right? So there's a lot of state defunding under Ford, as we know. So with respect to collaboration, it's a mess. And like I can have a child here in Toronto, but for some reason they have a worker that's all the way out in London, and I'm having to call both and fight with with two people at once. With the question of settlement workers, I don't like. I mean, the kids that we've had have not had settlement workers, and maybe that's just that the workers themselves are mindful of actually getting them citizenship. Um, but like, so you know, children have a right to a resource person, like that's written in the CYFSA. Unfortunately, like that requires the child to know about the service, which is its own problem, is what we're running into. But once that child has deemed someone a resource person, that person is like CAS is meant to make themselves available, whether in person or online, to hear information with respect to that child's best interest. So there's that. One thing, even as I use the word, one thing I want to note for people, there's a lot of literature critiquing this idea of the best interest of the child. It is not a legal concept that came from Black and Indigenous communities. It's actually being abused and has a lot of problems. Obviously, it's the language we often throw around, but I implore people to go, because as we're talking about how do we rethink engaging families, reading that literature is very helpful in helping us think about some of the problems existing in the system and how we might think collectively and together differently. So I did want to throw that in there.
Thank you very much, Josh. As we are getting towards the end of the program, I just want to say a big thank you to our three panelists for the rich insights from the discussion and for really sort of breaking down how things work in ways that are sort of shielded by the system sometimes. So thank you very much for that. And thank you to the audience for your participation and your questions and your comments in the chat. I'm going to hand it back over to Debbie now to close us out for the presentation. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Temisan, Abdullah, Josh, and Danette, for such an informative and enlightening conversation. We have so much work, so much advocacy work to do in this area. We can start. You heard from Abdullah about the potential deportation that he and others are facing. OCASI has a letter we're asking people to send to the Minister of Immigration, Minister Miller, copied to the Prime Minister. I believe I see it in the email. There it is. Please email the letter. You can customize it to your organization, put it on your letterhead, send it out. Let's get a movement going to stop the deportation. We did it with Abdul Abdi. We've done it with others. We must stop. Deportation is wrong, and double punishment is doubly wrong. So I am encouraging you all on this call to please send it out. I know many of you may need to check in with the leadership of your organization. Please do so. Strongly encourage them. All of you are members of OCASI. Let them know this is an OCASI letter that we're writing on the behalf, and we're asking our members to send it out. Please share it amongst your networks. We may also be sending out to you a call for support. Many of the 40 young people who are facing, or more young people who are facing deportation, are running into significant legal fees. They're not eligible in many cases for legal aid, and even sometimes, even when they are, it's just not sufficient. So we may be putting a call out to you through your registration emails to support Abdullah and others as you can. Thank you once again. Thank you to the OCASI staff. Thank you to the sector for coming out and engaging in this important conversation. Thank you all and have a great rest of day.